The ruins of Earth were nothing like the stories Darien had heard as a child. His mother, with her soft voice, used to tell him about the cities that once reached toward the stars, the bustling marketplaces, and the people who walked freely under blue skies. Now, all that remained was a broken, lifeless shell, a world battered by war and forgotten by time. Darien stood atop a crumbling skyscraper, looking out over the desolate landscape. The ground was cracked, and in the distance, the twisted remains of a once thriving metropolis lay in ruin. All that was left were faint traces of the civilization that had been eradicated centuries ago by the Thalrax. It was said that the alien empire had come from the stars like a storm, wiping out everything in their path. Earth, humanity's cradle, had fallen. But Darien, unlike many of his people, had never been content to accept the idea of humanity's extinction. The stories of Earth's golden age had fueled the fire within him, a hunger to know what had truly happened to the world. The legends told of the Revenant sons, descendants of Earth's greatest leaders, warriors, and visionaries, who were destined to return and reclaim their rightful place among the stars. He had spent years searching for evidence that the legends were true, but so far, everything had led to more questions. It wasn't until today that something tangible had been found, something he hadn't expected. Beneath the ruins of an old military complex, hidden deep underground, Darien had unearthed an artifact. It was an ancient relic, unlike anything he had ever seen before. The metal was unlike any known alloy, and the intricate designs etched across its surface pulsed faintly with an energy that didn't seem entirely natural. He had studied it for hours, but it wasn't until the last moment that it became clear what it was. A map. A map to the past. To a future that could still be forged. The realization hit Darien with the force of a lightning strike. He was holding the key to humanity's resurgence. The artifact had been left behind by his ancestors, by the true leaders of Earth who had known that one day their descendants would need to find it. This map led to something far more than a simple treasure. It was the legacy of an Earth that had been long forgotten, a legacy that could bring about the downfall of the Thalrax Empire. As he stood in the decaying remnants of his home planet, Darien knew that his life was about to change forever. The stars that once felt so far away were now within reach. His destiny was clear. He was no longer just a survivor of Earth's fall. He was one of the Revenant sons, the inheritor of humanity's hope. But Darien knew that he could not take this journey alone. The galaxy had been scattered into factions, and the survivors of Earth were hiding in the most remote corners of space. He would need to find others who shared his bloodline, who had the same fire burning within them. They had to come together, for the map had revealed something more than just a location. It revealed the key to the future, to the awakening of the ancient powers that had once made humanity the rulers of the stars. And so, Darien set his sights on the first of many destinations, the desert world of Talara, a place where humans had once thrived, now nothing more than a forgotten outpost. There, he would find Kale, a former soldier whose talents could prove invaluable in the battle ahead. As Darien prepared to leave, the wind howled through the ruins, sending dust swirling into the air. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that was sharper than any fear, a drive stronger than any obstacle that could stand in his way. The Revenant sons were no longer just a myth. They were real, and they were going to take back what was rightfully theirs. Humanity's future had just begun to take shape, and Darien would ensure it would not be forgotten again. The journey to Talara was long, and the vastness of space seemed to stretch endlessly before Darien, like an ocean of stars with no shore in sight. His small ship, a relic of an age-long past, creaked as it cut through the darkness, the faint hum of its engine the only sound keeping him company. Despite the vast emptiness surrounding him, Darien felt a spark of excitement. He was on the brink of something monumental. The map on the artifact was clear. The Revenant sons were not a fantasy. They were real, and he was about to find them. When he arrived in the orbit of Talara, the first thing he noticed was the eerie silence. The planet was a wasteland, its deserts stretching endlessly under a blood-red sky. Once a thriving hub of human ingenuity, Talara had been reduced to little more than a barren dust bowl, a forgotten outpost on the edge of the galaxy. Darian's ship touched down near the remnants of an old settlement. Its buildings collapsed into the earth, their outlines barely visible in the endless sandstorm that whipped across the surface. He had been to Talara once as a child, with his family, before the war. The vivid memories of a bustling marketplace, the rich smells of food, and the laughter of children seemed like another life altogether. Now there was only the wind and the sound of his boots crunching in the dry sand. The information he had on Kale was sparse. All he knew was that Kale had once been a soldier, part of a force stationed on Talara to keep the peace among the human settlers. But when the Thalrax came, everything had changed. The soldiers were either killed or scattered, their purpose erased. Kale had vanished into the wilderness, a man out of place in a world that no longer had room for heroes. Darian wasn't sure what he would find, but he had no choice but to hope that Kale was still alive, still out there. The search for Kale took days, the harsh winds and unforgiving terrain making it nearly impossible to navigate. But on the fourth day, Darian found a clue. A scorch mark on the side of an old transport vehicle, a sign of a battle fought long ago. Following the trail of destruction, Darian eventually found what he was looking for. Kale was sitting in the shadow of a ruined structure, his eyes focused on the horizon as if waiting for something, perhaps even someone. His face was weathered, his clothes tattered, and his once bright eyes were now dull, haunted by the years of hardship he'd endured. But there was still something undeniably sharp about him, a remnant of the soldier he had once been. Darian approached cautiously, unsure of how Kale would react to the sudden intrusion. Kale didn't look up immediately, his hands resting on a rifle slung across his lap. The air between them was thick with the weight of what had passed. The destruction, the lost comrades, the shattered future of humanity. "I've been waiting for someone like you," Kale finally spoke, his voice gruff and tired. "I knew this day would come. Didn't think it would be you, though." Darian felt a shiver run down his spine at the words. He had never expected Kale to be waiting for him. He had only hoped to find him alive, to convince him that they had a purpose. Yet, here they were, two men bound by blood and legacy, the last remnants of humanity's warrior class. "I need your help," Darian said, stepping closer. "We have a chance to take back what's ours. Earth's legacy is still out there, and the map I found leads us to it." Kale's eyes flickered with something. Skepticism, disbelief, or perhaps hope, a hope long buried under layers of doubt. "And what makes you think we have a chance? The Thalrax crushed us once. What makes you think we can fight them now?" Darian took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "Because we are not alone. We have the power of our ancestors on our side. And I'm not asking you to fight alone. We will find the others, those who are still out there. Together, we can take back what the Thalrax stole from us." For a long moment, Kale said nothing. The wind howled around them, but in that silence, Darian could see a flicker of something in Kale's eyes, an old spark, a glimmer of the man he had once been. Finally, Kale stood, wiping the dust from his hands and giving Darian a nod. "All right, kid," he said, a faint smirk on his lips. "Let's see if your ancestors left us something worth fighting for." As the two of them prepared to leave the ruins of Talara behind, Darian felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He had found the first of the Revenant sons, and together they would rebuild humanity's legacy, one step at a time. The journey ahead would be dangerous. There was no doubt about that. But for the first time in years, Darian could feel a spark of hope. The fight to reclaim humanity's rightful place had begun, and there was no turning back. Darian and Kel's journey from Talara was swift, their small ship cutting through the darkness of space with renewed purpose. But the long stretch of empty stars did little to calm the tension between them. Despite their shared goal, there was still an unspoken distance between them, a difference in belief, in the weight of their respective histories. Cale had lived through the collapse, and the bitterness of that loss had left scars deeper than any wound. Darien, however, carried with him a sense of hope that had been kindled by the discovery of the artifact. His belief in the Revenant sons, in the legends that had been passed down to him, burned brighter than ever. As the days passed in the silence of their journey, Darien spent most of his time studying the artifact. He had already deciphered part of the map, which pointed them toward a distant system in the outer rim of the galaxy. It was a place that had once been a hub of human engineering, a forgotten world where the ancient weapons of Earth had been hidden. Lyra's name had been mentioned in the old texts that came with the artifact. She was a brilliant engineer, one of Earth's finest minds, capable of unlocking the technologies the Thalrax had long buried under their rule. If Darien and Cale were to succeed, they would need her skills to unlock the ancient power lying dormant in the artifact. But Lyra, Darien knew, would not be easy to find. The system they approached was a desolate one, filled with dead moons and forgotten space stations. It had once been a thriving industrial sector, but the Thalrax had razed it years ago, leaving nothing behind but memories and dust. The coordinates from the map led them to a small station, barely holding together in the vacuum of space. Its exterior was pockmarked with scars, remnants of old battles fought long ago. But inside, the faint hum of life remained. Darien and Cale docked the ship in a dimly lit bay, stepping into the station with their weapons drawn. They were careful not to make too much noise. Word traveled fast in places like this, and they didn't know who or what might be watching. The station was empty, save for the faint sound of machinery and the distant echo of someone moving in the shadows. It didn't take long for them to find her. Lyra stood in a dim corner of a decrepit workshop, hunched over a piece of machinery, her hands expertly adjusting components with a level of focus that seemed almost unnatural. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her clothes were stained with oil and grime. But there was no mistaking her. She was exactly as the texts had described, sharp, calculating, and brilliant. Her reputation had preceded her, even in the most remote corners of the galaxy. Darien hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. "Lyra," he called, his voice firm but not unkind. She froze, her hand stilling over the piece of machinery. Then, slowly, she turned, her eyes narrowing as they fell on Darien and Cale. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind of silence that could turn dangerous in a heartbeat. "And who are you?" Lyra's voice was sharp, carrying an edge of suspicion. She had clearly been living under the radar for years, and it wasn't often that people sought her out. Darien met her gaze without flinching. "We need your help," he said. "I'm Darien, and this is Cale. We've come to find you. You're the key to unlocking something that could change the galaxy." Lyra's eyes flickered over Darien, scanning him for any sign of deceit. "I've heard the rumors. The Revenant sons. You think you're going to bring humanity back from the dead, don't you?" "Not think," Cale interjected, his tone gruff. "We're not here to ask for help. We're here because we're the last chance humanity has. Either you help us, or you watch the galaxy fall into the Thalrax's hands forever." Lyra raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Cale's bluntness. "And what makes you so sure that you're capable of doing any of that? The Thalrax wiped out Earth. What makes you think anything you do will change that?" Darien stepped forward, determination in his eyes. "Because the blood of our ancestors runs in our veins. The legends aren't just stories. They're a guide to what we can become. The map I found leads to something powerful, something that can defeat the Thalrax once and for all." For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. The silence between them felt heavy, leaden with the weight of lost hope. But then, as if making a decision, she set down the tools in her hands and looked Darien directly in the eyes. "All right, I'll help you. But only because I don't believe humanity is finished. And if this works, you'd better be ready for what comes next." Darien nodded, a sense of relief flooding him. They were one step closer to their goal. With Lyra on their side, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. They had the map, the knowledge, and now the skill to unlock it. But they were far from ready for what lay ahead. The Thalracs were watching, and their attempts to stop the Revenant sons would be relentless. As Lyra gathered her things and prepared to leave the station with them, Darien could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him. The fight to reclaim humanity's legacy was just beginning, and there would be no turning back. The journey to Exura was unlike any Darien had ever experienced. It was a hostile world, unforgiving, dangerous, and nearly impossible to navigate. Yet, for all its harshness, there was a pull to Exura, something almost magnetic that drew them toward it. Darien knew this planet held the key to their survival, and possibly the fate of the galaxy. Lyra had spent hours in the ship's cockpit, analyzing data from the artifact's map, cross-referencing it with old star charts. The map was cryptic, fragmented in parts, but there was no mistaking its call to Exura. The artifact had been left there for a reason. Whatever lay beneath the planet's radioactive surface could be humanity's last hope, or their final defeat. As they entered Exura's atmosphere, the ship's hull groaned under the strain. The planet was known for its violent electrical storms and lethal radiation levels, making it nearly impossible for ships to approach without sophisticated shielding. But Lyra had managed to rig the old vessel to withstand the worst of it. They'd come prepared, but even so, Darien couldn't shake the sense that they were flying straight into a trap. The Thalracs wouldn't let them reach their destination without a fight. "This place," Kale muttered, looking out of the viewport at the swirling toxic clouds below. "It feels like a graveyard." "That's because it is," Lyra replied, not taking her eyes off the controls. Exura was abandoned for a reason. The Thalracs saw it as too much of a risk to leave intact, but they never got around to fully wiping it out. Something here, something ancient, could still be dangerous, even to them. Darien's mind raced as they descended further into the planet's toxic atmosphere. He had heard the stories. It was said that Exura had once been the center of humanity's greatest technological achievements, a hub of innovation and weaponry that had rivaled even the Thalracs in power. But it was also a place of dark secrets, where some of the most dangerous weapons in human history were developed, weapons that could change the tide of the galaxy's war. The ship shook violently as they broke through the last layer of cloud, revealing the shattered surface of Exura. It was a barren wasteland, cracked and lifeless, with jagged mountain ranges that looked like broken teeth. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the landscape in flashes of brilliant white and deep purple. The storm was relentless, but Lyra piloted the ship with steady hands, navigating them toward an ancient facility buried deep in the mountains. "This is it," Lyra said, voice taut with concentration. "We're getting close." Darien felt his heart quicken. The facility they were approaching had been hidden for centuries. No one had set foot here in generations, except for the Thalracs, perhaps, who had tried to uncover its secrets and failed. As the ship touched down with a violent thud, Darien's breath caught in his throat. The facility stood before them like a forgotten giant, its walls scorched and cracked, its once grand entrance now choked with the debris of centuries. Despite the ravages of time, the structure still exuded a sense of silent power. The same power that had once been humanity's, now lying dormant beneath the planet's poisoned surface. Kale stepped out first, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. "I don't like this," he muttered. "Too quiet, too exposed." Darien nodded, but he refused to let the fear settle in. They had come too far, and he couldn't afford to hesitate now. Every moment they wasted brought them closer to losing their chance to reclaim Earth's legacy. The Thalracs would never stop hunting them, and they had no way of knowing how much time they truly had before the Empire would come crashing down on them. Lyra moved swiftly, activating a control panel on the side of the ship. "We need to get inside," she said. "The entrance is shielded, old tech, but powerful. If the Thalracs ever made it here, they would have had to deal with it." Darien, Kale, and Lyra moved toward the entrance, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The facility's doors slowly groaned open, revealing a long, dark corridor. The air inside was cold, stale, and thick with the scent of rust. But even in the darkness, Darian could feel it, a hum, deep and resonant, as though the facility itself was alive, waiting for something. "What exactly are we looking for?" Cale asked, his voice low. Darian's gaze swept over the crumbling walls. "The map leads us here. There's something hidden, something the Thorax never found. Whatever it is, it has the power to change everything." They stepped into the corridor, the heavy doors shutting behind them with a finality that sent a chill down Darian's spine. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. It felt as though the walls themselves were watching them, as if the very facility knew they had arrived, waiting for the Revenant sons to awaken what had been forgotten. Lyra's eyes flickered over her instruments. "We're getting close. I can feel it." Just then, the ground beneath their feet shook violently. The lights flickered, and a blaring alarm filled the air, echoing through the long, forgotten hallways. "We're not alone," Cale growled, already drawing his weapon. Darian's heart pounded in his chest. They had only just arrived, and already the storm was closing in around them. The Thorax were coming. Time was running out. The hunt had begun. The facility's alarms shrieked through the air, their blaring sound a reminder of the danger they were walking into. Darian's pulse quickened as the ground beneath their feet continued to tremble, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the planet itself. The walls of the ancient complex were closing in on them, pressing the urgency of their mission into every moment. Cale moved quickly, taking up position behind a rusted column, his rifle raised and scanning every shadow. Lyra was already at the control panel, her fingers flying over the dusty interface with frantic precision. "This place is ancient, but it's still alive," she muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The Thorax must have known something was here, which is why they kept this place on lockdown. They just didn't know what it could do." Darian's eyes swept the corridor. The air felt thick, charged with a nervous energy, like the place itself was anticipating the arrival of the intruders. He had expected trouble. He'd prepared for the worst. But what was happening now was more than they'd bargained for. The Thorax were close, and from the sound of it, they were ready to strike. "We need to move," Cale growled from behind cover, his voice low but sharp. "We can't afford to be caught in the open." Lyra looked up from the panel, her face pale but determined. "I've unlocked the inner vault. It's a straight shot through the facility. But if we're going to make it, we need to move now." Darian gave a single nod, signaling to Cale that they would push forward. Their mission was clear: reach the vault, uncover what had been hidden away for centuries, and claim the legacy of humanity before the Thorax could find it. The three of them moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the cold, empty hallways. The once pristine walls now crumbled around them, vines of ancient technology crawling like veins across the facility's skeleton. But despite the decay, Darian could feel the pulse of something more, something ancient and powerful, just beyond the next corner. As they approached the vault, the air grew even heavier, as if the very facility was holding its breath, waiting for them to activate whatever ancient power lay within. Darian reached out, placing his hand on the activation panel, and with a low hum, the doors slowly slid open. Inside, the vault was a cathedral of forgotten technology. Rows upon rows of what appeared to be dormant machines lined the walls, their intricate designs gleaming despite the layers of dust. And at the center of it all, a massive pedestal stood, holding an artifact that could change the course of history. It was a crystalline structure, unlike anything Darian had ever seen. Its surface shimmered with an ethereal light, and beneath its translucent shell, a faint pulse of energy beat in time with his own heart. "This is it," Darian breathed, stepping forward, his hand trembling as he reached toward the artifact. It was humanity's last hope, a key to undoing the Thorax's stranglehold on the galaxy. If they could unlock its secrets, the balance of power could shift. Earth's lost empire could rise again. But just as his fingers brushed the surface of the artifact, A loud crash echoed from the corridor. The ground shook violently, and before they could react, the metallic doors at the far end of the vault burst open. Thalrak soldiers, clad in their jagged armor, stormed into the room, their weapons aimed directly at Darien, Kale, and Lyra. Their cold, reptilian eyes locked onto the Revenant sons with a hunger that sent a chill down Darien's spine. The Thalraks had come. "I knew it was only a matter of time before you found it," one of the soldiers sneered, his voice harsh and guttural. "The ancient relic of your people, a worthless trinket. You think you can defy us?" Darien's grip tightened around the artifact, his mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The Thalraks would not give up this prize without a fight. But there was no turning back now. They had to survive, and they had to secure the artifact before the Thalraks could destroy it. "Fight them off," Kale shouted, already raising his rifle. "Get to cover." Lyra dove behind a column, her hand still grasping the activation controls. "If I can just get this thing powered up, we can make a run for it," she yelled over the gunfire. Darien's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted toward the artifact, determined to protect it at all costs. The Thalrak soldiers were closing in fast, their weapons charging with deadly energy, but Darien didn't hesitate. The legacy of Earth, the very future of humanity, rested in his hands. With a final, desperate push, he grasped the artifact and activated its core. A blinding light erupted from the crystal, sending a shockwave that knocked the Thalrak soldiers back, their weapons falling to the ground with a deafening clang. The artifact hummed with power, its pulse now in sync with the rhythm of the galaxy itself. The Thalraks recoiled, momentarily stunned by the unexpected surge of energy. But Darien knew they wouldn't be down for long. The battle was far from over. The Thalraks would be relentless, and time was running out. They had the artifact, but now they needed to escape, alive, and with the knowledge of how to wield its power before it was too late. "Move, now," Kale shouted, pulling Darien away from the pedestal. The fight for humanity's future had only just begun. The brilliant pulse from the artifact had knocked the Thalrak soldiers back, but they were not incapacitated for long. Their reptilian eyes narrowed, their weapons crackling with renewed energy as they surged forward once again, intent on reclaiming what Darien and his team had stolen. The vault's sterile industrial walls seemed to close in around them, but they had no choice but to fight. There was nowhere to run. Darien's breath came in ragged gasps as he clutched the artifact tighter, feeling the hum of its energy pulse through his hands. He could feel its power, ancient and untapped, thrumming with potential. But he knew that their survival depended on more than just the artifact's strength. It depended on them working together, and fast. "Kale, cover me," Darien yelled, ducking behind a row of ancient tech that littered the floor like broken machinery. The Thalraks were already reloading their weapons, aiming deadly energy beams at the Revenant sons. Kale fired from behind a support column, his rifle crackling with high-powered shots that sent the Thalrak soldiers diving for cover. Lyra was at the control panel again, her fingers a blur of motion as she activated hidden defenses in the facility's walls. "I'm trying to override the security systems," she shouted. "But they've locked us out. I'll need more time." Time. They didn't have time. The Thalraks were already regrouping, adjusting their strategies for a final assault. The floor beneath them vibrated as they heard the unmistakable sound of reinforcements arriving. They had to move, or they'd be trapped. "Darien, move," Kale shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "Get to the exit. We need to get out of here. Now." The shout of a Thalrak's commander echoed through the vault, a high-pitched screech that sent a chill down Darien's spine. More soldiers flooded in, cutting off their retreat. Their backs were to the walls now, literally. There was no way out without fighting their way through, and they were outgunned. The light from the artifact grew brighter as Darien gripped it harder, willing it to do something, anything, to turn the tide of the battle. But it wasn't just the artifact's power they had to rely on. It was their unity, their resilience, and the weight of what they were fighting for. Earth had fallen once. Humanity's legacy had been buried, but Darien wasn't ready to let it go again. He exchanged a look with Kale, a silent understanding passing between them. They had no choice but to fight their way out. "Lyra," Darien yelled over the chaos. "We need a way out." Lyra's eyes flicked up from the control panel, her brow furrowed in frustration. "The main escape routes are sealed. We'll have to go through the maintenance tunnels. It's our only chance." Without waiting for a response, Lyra sprinted toward a side door, pulling a heavy lever that activated a hatch in the floor. Beneath them, dark tunnels sprawled out like veins beneath the facility. The Thelrac soldiers were fast closing in, their weapons charging for another attack, but they had no choice. If they stayed, they would die here. "Move," Kale barked, pushing Darien toward the hatch. "We'll fight our way through them if we have to." Darien hesitated, glancing at the artifact in his hand. The light from it was growing brighter still, almost overwhelming in its intensity, and for a moment he wondered if it was reacting to the danger, or if it had become something more, a tool, a weapon, a beacon. Whatever it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was something alive, something that recognized the peril they were in. Without another thought, Darien followed Kale and Lyra into the maintenance tunnel. The hatch slammed shut above them, and the world outside went dark. The only sound now was their heavy breathing as they moved deeper into the bowels of the facility. The tunnel was narrow, cramped, and the air thick with the scent of decay. But it was their best chance at survival. As they moved through the cold darkness, Darien couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by something ancient and far more dangerous than the Thelracs. It wasn't just the enemies outside that posed a threat. This place had secrets, and they had just begun to uncover them. "What the hell just happened back there?" Kale muttered under his breath. "The artifact. It's like it was reacting to the fight. But I've never seen anything like it." "I don't know," Darien replied, his voice low. "But it's not just a relic. It's something else. We need to figure out how to use it. We can't afford to just run from the Thelracs forever." "We don't have much of a choice," Lyra said, her voice tight with anxiety. "We need to keep moving. The Thelracs will be on us in minutes. We can't let them catch us down here." But as they pressed forward, the feeling of being watched intensified. The deeper they went, the more Darien felt the pull of the artifact growing stronger, as though it was guiding them toward something, or perhaps away from it. Something far more dangerous was down here, something the Thelracs hadn't found in all their years of searching. And Darien knew, without a doubt, that whatever it was, they would have to face it soon. The maintenance tunnels were even darker than Darien had anticipated, and the deeper they moved, the heavier the air grew. The walls were slick with years of neglect, and the faint hum of the artifact's power was the only thing that kept them moving forward. It pulsed in Darien's hand like a living thing, its light casting eerie shadows across the metal walls as if it were alive, guiding them toward something hidden deep within Exura. They moved quickly, the sounds of their footsteps muted by the damp, cold atmosphere. But Darien could feel something else in the air, something subtle and unsettling. The tunnels seemed to shift around them, as though they were not entirely solid, but fluid, alive. It was as if the very structure of the facility was watching them, responding to their presence. Kale led the way, his rifle raised, scanning the darkness ahead. Lyra stayed close, her eyes flicking over the strange controls embedded in the walls. Darien couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn deeper into the belly of the beast, but he had no choice but to follow. They were running out of time, and the Thelracs were still hunting them. "What the hell is this place?" Kale muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It feels like it's alive." Lyra shot him a look, her face grim. "I think it is," she said quietly. "The facility's systems are still functioning. But this place, this is something else. This isn't just an old weapons depot or research lab. It's something much older." Darien's gaze flickered down at the artifact, still thrumming in his hand, its pulse syncing with his heart. "It's calling us," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "We're being led to something." Before Cale could respond, the tunnel ahead opened up into a vast chamber, the walls towering like the interior of some ancient cathedral. A massive, intricate structure dominated the center of the room. It was a machine, but not one like Darian had ever seen before. Its design was alien, vast, and incomprehensible, its surface covered in strange symbols and glowing lines that shifted with an eerie organic fluidity. The artifact in Darian's hand pulsed faster, its glow becoming blinding. As they stepped into the chamber, the floor beneath them hummed, and the symbols on the machine seemed to come to life, shifting and rearranging before their eyes. "This is it," Lyra breathed, her voice reverberating in the chamber. "This is what we were meant to find. It's not just a weapon. It's a gateway." Darian's heart skipped a beat. A gateway? To what? Before he could voice his thoughts, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by a booming mechanical sound. The walls began to shake, and the air grew thick with an unnatural energy. The ground vibrated violently beneath their feet as the massive machine came to life, its gears whirring and grinding as its core began to hum with a deafening power. Darian's eyes widened as a massive energy beam shot up from the machine's core, piercing the ceiling and sending tremors through the entire facility. He could feel the heat radiating from it, and he instinctively pulled the artifact closer to his chest, as though it might protect him. "What the hell is happening?" Cale shouted, ducking behind a pillar as debris rained down around them. "The machine," Lyra gasped. "It's activating. But it's not just any machine. This is a weapons platform. It's designed to channel energy. Immense power." "Power to do what?" Darian asked, his voice low and tight with dread. Lyra's face paled as she watched the machine's core pulse faster, its light brighter, almost blinding. "It can channel energy on a galactic scale. If it's fully activated, it could wipe out entire fleets, entire planets." The sound of Thalrak's soldiers echoed from the tunnel behind them, growing louder with each passing second. The Thalraks had caught up. This time, they wouldn't be as easy to evade. "We don't have much time," Cale shouted, his voice tense. "We need to shut this down before it reaches full power." "Shut it down." Lyra's voice cracked with disbelief. "This thing is beyond anything we've ever seen. I don't think we can just turn it off." Darian's gaze flickered back to the artifact, the pulse within it now nearly overwhelming. It was as though it was calling to the machine, sensing with its energy. He took a step forward, ignoring the weight of the situation, the Thalraks closing in behind them. If the artifact had brought them here, maybe it could control the machine too. He placed the artifact into a hollowed-out indentation on the machine's surface, and immediately the ground beneath them hummed violently, as if the very walls of the chamber were holding their breath. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blinding flash of light. The air crackled with energy, and a massive shockwave radiated outward from the machine, knocking Darian and his team off their feet. The chamber shook violently, and all he could hear was the deafening roar of energy. The artifact was alive, and it was reacting in ways he couldn't begin to understand. But as the light began to fade, Darian realized something had changed. The power was shifting, but not in the way he'd expected. The Thalraks were still coming, and now they had an enemy far more dangerous than themselves to contend with. The blinding flash of light slowly faded, and the chamber was plunged back into a thick, almost suffocating darkness. Darian's mind raced, trying to process the chaos, but the pounding in his ears made it difficult to think clearly. His heart was still pounding in his chest as he scrambled to his feet, his fingers still clutching the artifact, which now seemed to pulse with an intensity that sent electric shivers up his spine. "We need to move, now," Cale shouted, his voice filled with urgency as he shoved Darian to the side, taking position by a column. Darian shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. The artifact, now embedded in the heart of the machine, had triggered something, but it wasn't just power. The very air around them felt charged, thick with a force that was almost tangible. "What did we just do?" Lyra muttered, her voice shaking as she got back to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We activated something we don't understand. This is bad." Darian didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could feel it too. The energy in the room had shifted, becoming something else entirely, as though the machine was no longer just a tool of destruction, but a force of nature itself. The walls of the chamber trembled again, and the sound of grinding metal echoed from the far side of the room. The Thalrak soldiers were getting closer, their voices echoing through the corridors, their footsteps pounding against the floor like a drumbeat of inevitable death. But the sound of the soldiers' approach wasn't the only thing they heard. A deep, guttural hum vibrated through the floor, like the growl of a beast awakening. It wasn't from the Thalraks. It wasn't even from the machine they had just activated. It was something else, something ancient and terrifying. The chamber trembled again, and the walls began to crack, long fissures snaking across the floor. Then, from the shattered ceiling, a massive shape descended, something so large it blotted out the dim light from the artifact. It was humanoid, but its proportions were wrong. Unnaturally long limbs, glowing eyes that burned with an otherworldly fire. It moved with an eerie grace, each step shaking the room, each movement sending tremors through the walls. "What in the hell is that?" Kale whispered, his voice barely audible. Darian's throat went dry as he realized what they were facing. It was no Thalrak soldier, no mere mechanical beast. It was something far older, an entity of destruction, born of the ancient facility. This was the true weapon, the one they had been warned about, the one humanity had sealed away long ago. "Everyone back," Darian shouted, his instincts kicking in. The artifact in his hand was glowing brighter than ever before, pulsing in time with the monstrous entity's movements. The entity, now towering over them, didn't seem to notice the Thalrak soldiers that had been advancing toward them. It was fixated on Darian and his team, as though it had recognized them for what they were, the ones who had disturbed its slumber. Lyra raised her gun, but her hand shook as she aimed at the creature. "We can't fight this thing, Darian. We need to get out of here now." But there was no time for escape. The creature extended a long skeletal arm, its fingers razor-sharp, and reached for Darian. As it did, the ground cracked beneath them, sending the team skidding toward the edge of the chamber. The Thalraks, still advancing, had no idea what they were up against, but Darian saw the flicker of terror in their eyes as they witnessed the colossal beast emerge from the shadows. Darian's grip tightened around the artifact, and with a deep breath, he called on whatever power lay within it. The hum of the artifact intensified, and the very air seemed to crackle as he held it up high, aiming its energy at the monstrous creature. He didn't know how it worked, didn't understand the full extent of its power, but in that moment, he had no choice but to try. A beam of pure energy erupted from the artifact, striking the creature with such force that the entire chamber shook. The beast reeled back, its scream echoing through the room like the howl of a dying god. The energy was overwhelming, a torrent of light and force, but it was not enough to destroy the creature. It was only enough to stun it. "Darian, we need to go," Kale shouted, pulling him away from the glowing artifact. Darian nodded, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. The machine, the artifact, it was all part of something much larger than they had ever understood. They couldn't defeat the creature with brute force alone, but they had just triggered something that might destroy everything in its wake, and the Thalraks wouldn't stand a chance against it. The Thalrak soldiers were now fully engaged with the creature, firing their weapons at it with no effect. The chamber was chaos. Bright energy beams, roars of fury, and the frantic pounding of feet as Darian and his team fought their way toward the only exit left, the one the Thalraks had blocked earlier. They were trapped in a fight between ancient forces and the present, with only one path ahead: to escape, to survive, and to find a way to control the artifact before it controlled them. As they dashed for the exit, Darien could hear the creature's anguished roars echoing through the facility. Whatever the artifact had unleashed, they had no choice but to face it together. The future of humanity, and their very survival, depended on it.